I still remember the taste of that hospital coffee, way bitter as the betrayal that brought me there. My name is Samuel Sam Washington, and at 73 years old, I thought I had seen enough darkness for one lifetime. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the day my own children tried to bury me alive while my heart was still beating. If you've ever wondered how far greed can push family, stay with me. This story might save your life, or at least your inheritance. Before I continue, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I promise you, by the end of this tale, you'll want to call your parents. I lived in Detroit, Michigan, when all this went down. A city that's seen its share of broken dreams, but none quite like mine. Chapter 1. When Love Still Lived in Our House. Looking back now, I should have seen the shadows gathering. It was March 2019, and my wife, Gloria, and I had just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary at the Old Baptist Church on Woodward Avenue. My two children, Marcus, 45, with his law degree and empty promises, and Jasmine, 42, with her real estate license and faker smile, they both showed up late. Marcus drove up in his BMW that I'd co-signed for, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly pension. Jasmine came separately, always checking her phone, always somewhere else in her mind. Gloria, God rest her soul. She squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "They're here, Sam. That's what matters." But even then, I caught them whispering in the corner, looking at us like we were problems to be solved, not parents to be loved. The house on Boston Boulevard had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his bare hands after coming up from Mississippi in 1942. Each brick a promise that his family would never go hungry again. Gloria had planted roses in the front yard when we first moved in as newlyweds. Red ones for love, white ones for new beginnings. Every Sunday after church, the whole neighborhood would see us on that porch. Gloria with her sweet tea, and me with my newspaper, waving at folks passing by. The house was worth something now. The gentrification creeping through Detroit had developers knocking monthly, offering cash we didn't need for a home we'd never sell. Marcus knew this. Jasmine knew this. They'd started asking questions about property taxes, about maintenance costs, about what happens when you can't climb those stairs anymore, Pop. Our Sunday dinners used to be sacred. Gloria would start cooking at dawn. Collard greens with smoked turkey, mac and cheese that would make you forget your own name, cornbread so good the pastor himself would stop by. But by that spring, Marcus would send his wife Karen instead, always with excuses about depositions and client meetings. Jasmine would show up, but she'd barely touch her food, always on some new diet, always filming everything for her social media instead of actually being present. "Mama's cooking isn't good enough for you anymore?" I asked once, and the look Jasmine gave me, cold as January wind off Lake Michigan. It should have told me everything. She said, "Daddy, we're just worried about your cholesterol, about both of your health. These old houses, all these stairs, all this maintenance. Maybe it's time you and Mama considered some place easier." That night, after everyone left, I found Gloria crying in the kitchen. She was holding the photo album from our anniversary party, running her fingers over pictures of Marcus's first day of kindergarten, Jasmine's high school graduation, All those Christmases when the kids would wake us up at 5 in the morning, too excited to wait. They don't look at us the same anymore, Sam, she said. And I held her tight, told her she was imagining things. But deep down, in that place where truth lives, whether you acknowledge it or not, I knew she was right. I just didn't know how right she was. The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus's BMW in our driveway at 6 a.m. and him on our porch with a manila folder that would change everything. What he showed me in that folder, documents about power of attorney, estate planning, something called a life estate deed. It looked official, looked like love wrapped in legal terms. Just thinking about your future, Pop, about making sure you and Mama are protected. But if you've been lied to by someone you loved, you know that feeling in your gut, like swallowing glass. Marcus's hands were shaking as he pushed the pen toward me, and behind him, through the kitchen window, I saw Jasmine's car parked across the street, waiting, watching. That's when I knew my own blood had turned cold. And the war, for everything my grandfather built, was about to begin. I told Marcus I needed time to think, to talk to his mother. The look that flashed across his face, disappointment mixed with something darker, it was the last time I'd ever see my son without his mask on. After Marcus left that morning, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I went to see my brother Jerome over on the east side. Jerome ran a small detective agency out of a storefront on Gratiot Avenue, the kind of place where people went when they needed to know if their spouse was cheating or their business partner was stealing. "Sam," he said when he saw me, "you look like a man who just found out his house is haunted." I told him about the papers, about the way Marcus's hands shook, about Jasmine waiting in her car like a getaway driver. Jerome poured us both coffee, the strong kind that could wake the dead, and said something that chilled me to the bone. When family starts acting like strangers, you better start protecting yourself like they are. He agreed to look into my children's finances, their recent activities, anything that might explain this sudden interest in their parents' estate. What Jerome found over the next 2 weeks turned my stomach inside out. Marcus, my son with the law degree and the big office downtown, was drowning in gambling debts, $180,000 to some very unfriendly people who don't take IOUs. His house in Bloomfield Hills, the one he bragged about at every family gathering, was in foreclosure. The BMW I'd co-signed for had 2 payments left before repossession. But here's what hurt him most. He'd been telling people his parents were senile, that we couldn't manage our affairs, that someone needed to step in before we gave everything away to the church or got scammed. Jasmine wasn't much better. Her real estate business was a front. She hadn't sold a house in 2 years. Her husband had left her for his secretary, taken half of everything, and she'd been living off credit cards and borrowed time. Together, they'd been meeting with a lawyer who specialized in one thing: elder guardianship cases. Gloria took the news harder than I did. We sat in our living room, the one where we'd raised these children, where we'd helped them with homework, and kissed scraped knees, and celebrated every small victory like it was the World Series. "Where did we go wrong, Sam?" she asked, and I didn't have an answer. We'd given them everything: college educations, down payments on their first homes, bail money when Marcus got that DUI he swore would never happen again. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe we'd given them so much they forgot what earning meant, what family meant, what love without conditions meant. That night, Gloria couldn't eat. She just sat at the dinner table, staring at their empty chairs, remembering ghosts of better times. I held her hand, feeling her pulse, steady but sad, like a funeral drum. Jerome had a contact at the courthouse, and what she told him next made my blood run backward. Marcus and Jasmine had already filed preliminary paperwork, not for guardianship yet, but something called a competency evaluation request. They'd claimed we'd been showing signs of dementia, that I'd been found wandering the neighborhood confused, a complete lie, that Gloria had left the stove on multiple times, another lie, that we'd given away $50,000 to a Nigerian prince email scam, the biggest lie of all. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. If we didn't show up with our own lawyer, if we didn't fight back, the court might actually grant them emergency temporary control over our finances. They're trying to ambush you, Jerome said, like wolves circling wounded deer. But Sam, you ain't wounded, and you ain't no deer. That Sunday at church, Pastor Williams preached about Judas, about betrayal, about silver coins, and the price of a soul. I sat there feeling every word like nails in my palms. Gloria squeezed my hand during the sermon, and I saw tears rolling down her cheeks. After service, we stayed behind to pray. Just the two of us. That empty sanctuary, sunlight streaming through stained glass, casting red and blue shadows on everything. Lord, I prayed out loud, I don't know what I did to deserve this, but if it's a test, give me the strength to pass it. And if it's punishment, at least let Gloria be spared. When we got home, there was a note on our door from a company called Golden Years Assisted Living, with a brochure about their beautiful facilities and dignified transition services. Someone had scheduled a tour for us. Someone named Marcus Washington, claiming to be our concerned son and legal representative. The confrontation came on a Thursday. I'd asked Marcus and Jasmine to come for dinner, told them Gloria had something important to discuss. What they didn't know was that Jerome would be there too, along with our lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, a 60-year-old sister who didn't play when it came to elder abuse. Gloria cooked like it was the Last Supper, everything they'd loved as children, hoping maybe the familiar smells would remind them who we were to them. Marcus showed up first, checking his phone every 30 seconds, sweating even though it was cool outside. Jasmine came 10 minutes later with her laptop, talking about showing us some wonderful options for our golden years. When they saw Jerome and Mrs. Henderson sitting in the living room, their faces went through more changes than a traffic light. Sit down, I said, using the voice I'd used when they were teenagers caught sneaking out. We need to have a conversation about family, about money, and about lies. Marcus started to stand, but Jerome's hand on his shoulder suggested otherwise. Mrs. Henderson pulled out her own manila folder, thick as a phone book, and began laying out papers on the coffee table. Bank statements showing our perfect credit. Medical records from our doctors stating we were both of sound mind and body. And then the crown jewel, security footage from our neighbor's camera showing Marcus and Jasmine meeting with that Golden Years representative in his car, counting what looked like cash. The company pays a finder's fee, Mrs. Henderson explained, for every senior citizen successfully transitioned into their facility. Your children were going to get $10,000 each once you were admitted." Jasmine broke first. She started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of anger at being caught. "You don't understand," she said, mascara running like black rivers. "We're drowning. Marcus is going to get his legs broken. I'm going to be homeless. And you're sitting on a gold mine, living in the past, too stubborn to help your own children." That's when Gloria spoke, and her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "We would have helped you. We always have. All you had to do was ask, was be honest, was remember that we're your parents, not your piggy bank." Marcus finally found his voice, and it was ugly. "Ask? Beg? For what's going to be ours, anyway? You're 73, Dad. Mom's 71. How much longer do you really think you have? Why should we suffer while you sit on wealth you don't even use?" The room got so quiet you could hear the roses outside rustling in the wind. I stood up, my knees creaking but my resolve solid. "Get out of my house," I said. "Both of you, and don't come back until you remember what family means." Marcus laughed, bitter as burned coffee. "This isn't over, old man. One way or another, we're going to get what we deserve." Jasmine gathered her things, and as she passed Gloria, she whispered something I'll never forget. "You should have died years ago. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." After they left, Gloria collapsed in my arms, sobbing like I hadn't seen since we lost our third baby 40 years ago. Jerome and Mrs. Henderson stayed with us until midnight, planning our next moves, building our defenses. But that night, lying in bed, Gloria turned to me and said, "Sam, I don't think my heart can take much more of this. I should have listened to her, should have heard what her body was trying to tell us. But I was too angry, too focused on the fight ahead, too determined to win a war that had already cost us everything worth fighting for." The next morning, Gloria didn't wake up at her usual 6 a.m. When I touched her shoulder at 7, she was cold. The paramedics said it was a massive heart attack, probably happened around 3 a.m. She died in her sleep, in the bed we'd shared for 50 years, in the house her roses still guarded, while I slept beside her, unaware that my children had managed to kill their mother without laying a finger on her. The last thing she'd said to me before bed was, "Sam, promise me something. Don't let hatred be our legacy." I promised. But standing at her funeral 3 days later, watching Marcus and Jasmine cry their crocodile tears for the neighbors, I wasn't sure it was a promise I could keep. The day after Gloria's funeral, I found them in the house. Marcus was in my bedroom, going through Gloria's jewelry box. Jasmine was in the basement, taking pictures of everything, making notes on her phone. They had a key. Of course they did. We'd given them keys when they were teenagers, never imagining we'd need to change the locks against our own blood. "The funeral's barely over," I said from the doorway. "And you're already looting?" Marcus didn't even look ashamed. "We're doing inventory, Dad. Someone has to. You're clearly not capable of managing all this alone." That's when I noticed the papers in his hand. Gloria's life insurance policy, the one we'd taken out when the kids were babies, worth $500,000. He'd already highlighted his name as beneficiary from years ago, back when we trusted him with our lives. I still taste that hospital coffee, bitter as the betrayal that brought me there. My daughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "You should have died years ago." Not to a stranger, to me, her father, the man who walked her down the aisle, who paid for her education, who held her when she cried about her first heartbreak. And you know what the worst part was? She meant it. Every single word. But that wasn't even the worst thing she did to me. No, the worst thing... I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever wondered how far greed can push family, stay with me. This might be the hardest story I've ever told, but it might also save your life, or at least your inheritance. Before I go any further, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Detroit, Atlanta, London, anywhere. I promise you, by the end of this, you'll want to call your parents, or your children, or both. Because what I'm about to tell you, it still doesn't feel real, even though I lived through every moment of it. Even though the scars on my heart prove it happened. My name is Robert Thompson, but everyone calls me Bobby. I'm 73 years old now, and when all this went down, I was living in Detroit, Michigan. A city that's seen its share of broken dreams, believe me, but none quite like mine. None that cut as deep as what my own blood did to me and my wife. This is my testimony. This is my warning. And God help me. This is my truth. It was March 2019, and the church on Woodward Avenue was packed for our 50th wedding anniversary celebration. 50 years, half a century, with the woman who made me believe in forever. Margaret wore this cream-colored dress she'd bought special for the occasion. And when she walked into that church, I swear every head turned. At 71, she was still the most beautiful woman in any room. Her smile could light up the darkest corner of your soul. We'd survived Vietnam. I came back with shrapnel still in my leg, and nightmares that took a decade to fade. We'd survived Detroit's darkest years, when the city was bleeding jobs and hope. We'd survived the loss of our third baby, a little boy we never got to name. Through it all, Margaret held my hand and whispered, "We'll make it, Bobby. We always do." But that day, celebrating 50 years, I should have seen the shadows already creeping in. Our son Daniel arrived late, 45 years old, driving a BMW I'd co-signed for, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. My daughter Catherine rolled up separately in her Mercedes, though I later learned it was 3 payments away from repossession. They didn't arrive together, didn't coordinate, didn't seem to care that their mother had been watching the door for an hour, hoping to see her babies walk in. When they finally showed, Margaret squeezed my hand under the table. This grip that said, "They're here, Bobby. That's all that matters." But I caught them in the corner, whispering, looking at us like we were problems needing solutions, not parents deserving celebration. Daniel kept checking his phone. Catherine kept excusing herself to take calls. And when Pastor Williams asked them to say a few words about us, their speeches felt hollow, rehearsed, empty. The house on Boston Boulevard had been in our family 3 generations deep. My grandfather built it with his bare hands after coming up from Mississippi in 1942. Every brick was a promise that his family would never go hungry again, never be homeless again, never bow their heads to any man. My daddy expanded it, added a second floor where Margaret and I raised our babies. Margaret planted roses in the front yard when we first moved in as newlyweds. Red ones for love, white ones for new beginnings. Every Sunday after church, the whole neighborhood would see us on that porch. Her with sweet tea, me with the newspaper, both of us waving at folks passing by. Our house was the heartbeat of that block. People knew if they needed help, our door was open. If they needed a meal, in Margaret's kitchen was cooking. If they needed prayer, we'd pray right there on the porch. But Detroit was changing. Gentrification was creeping through our neighborhood like ivy, covering everything old with something new and expensive. Developers were knocking on doors monthly, waving cash offers that made your eyes water. Young white couples with tech money were buying up houses, renovating them, flipping them for double. Our neighbors were selling and moving out to the suburbs, chasing that check, but not us. Margaret would say, "Bobby, this house has our roots in the foundation. You don't sell your roots for money." I agreed. This was our legacy. This was where Daniel took his first steps, where Catherine learned to ride her bike. Every scratch on the floor, every mark on the doorframe measuring the kids' heights, every memory baked into those walls. It was priceless. But I noticed Daniel and Catherine asking questions. "How much are the property taxes now, Dad? Who's going to maintain this big old house when you can't? What happens when you can't climb those stairs anymore?" That night after the anniversary party, I found Margaret crying in the kitchen. Not sad tears, worried tears. She was holding our photo album, running her fingers over pictures of Daniel's first day of kindergarten, Catherine's high school graduation, all those Christmases when they'd wake us at 5 in the morning, too excited to wait. "They don't look at us the same anymore, Bobby," she said, voice cracking. "They look at us like we're in the way." I pulled her close, told her she was imagining things, that our kids loved us. But in that place where truth lives, whether you acknowledge it or not, I knew she was right. I felt it too. The coldness, the calculation, the way they'd stopped asking about our health and started asking about our assets. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Margaret's breathing, wondering when exactly our children had stopped seeing us as people and started seeing us as paychecks. I didn't know then that I had less than a year left with my wife. I didn't know that my children were already planning how to take everything. If I had known, would I have fought harder? Or would I have just held Margaret tighter? The sun wasn't even up when I heard the car in the driveway. 6 in the morning, still dark outside, and Daniel's BMW was idling in front of our house like he'd been waiting for first light. I watched him from the bedroom window, saw him checking his phone, looking at our house like he was appraising it for auction. Margaret was still asleep. I threw on my robe and headed downstairs, each step on those old wooden stairs creaking a warning I didn't understand yet. When I opened the front door, Daniel was on the porch, holding this manila folder so thick it looked like it had our entire lives stuffed inside. "Morning, Pop," he said, but his voice had this edge. Not warmth, not love, just business. "We need to talk about your future, about making sure you and Mom are protected." I let him in because he was my son, because 30 years of parenting teaches you to open doors, to give chances, to believe the best. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with algebra homework, where we'd celebrated his law school acceptance, where he'd brought his first girlfriend to meet us. Now, he was spreading papers across that table like he was dealing cards. Power of attorney documents, estate planning forms, something called a life estate deed that looked official enough to be real, but felt wrong enough to make my stomach turn. Just thinking about you and Mom, Daniel said, pushing the papers toward me. Making sure if something happens, everything's handled right. You're 73, Pop. Mom's 71. It's time to be smart about this. But his hands were shaking. Not nervous shaking. Desperate shaking. Like a man drowning, grabbing at anything that floats. I picked up the papers, tried to read through the legal language that lawyers use to hide truth behind syllables. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and the words kept swimming. But I caught enough. These documents would give Daniel control over everything. Our bank accounts, our house, our decisions. I'd still own its paper, but he'd control it in practice. Why the rush? I asked, looking up at him. Why 6 in the morning with papers I haven't seen before? That's when I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Something dark. Something that made him look like a stranger wearing my son's skin. Because I'm trying to help you before it's too late, he snapped. Then softer, forced calm, before you do something you can't undo. Before you give everything away to the church or get scammed. Outside, I heard another car. Through the kitchen window, I saw Catherine's Mercedes parked across the street. Waiting, watching. They'd coordinated this, planned it. My 2 children were working together for the first time in years, and it was against me. I need time to think, I said, pushing the papers back. Need to talk to your mother. Need to have our own lawyer look at this. Daniel's jaw clenched. His hand slammed down on the table, rattling Margaret's favorite teacups. Time? Pop, we don't have time. The property taxes are going up. The house needs work. You're getting older. What happens when you fall down those stairs? When Mom forgets to turn off the stove? When you can't remember if you took your medications? Every word was a nail trying to build a coffin for my independence. But I'd survived Vietnam. I'd survived Detroit's worst years. I wasn't going to be bullied by my own son in my own kitchen. Get out, I said quietly. Take your papers and get out of my house. The look that crossed his face, pure rage mixed with panic, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about protection. This was about desperation. After Daniel left, tires screeching like he was escaping a crime scene, I sat at that kitchen table, shaking, not from fear, from heartbreak, because a father knows his son's face better than his own. I knew every expression Daniel had, his happy face, his sad face, his lying face from when he was 6 years old stealing cookies. And what I'd seen that morning was new, foreign, dangerous. Margaret came downstairs, drawn by the sound of the slamming door. Who was that? She asked, tying her robe. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not while she still had her coffee face on, still soft from sleep, still believing our children loved us without conditions. Friend, nobody, baby, I lied. Just somebody turning around in the driveway. But as she poured her coffee, humming that old hymn she loved, I made a decision. I needed help. I needed to know what was really going on with our children. So I called the one person in this world I trusted more than anyone except Margaret. I called him my brother Vincent. Vincent ran a small detective agency out of a storefront on Gratiot Avenue, the kind of place where people went when they needed truth about cheating spouses or stealing partners. We'd grown up together in that same house on Boston Boulevard, back when Granddaddy first built it. Vincent was 2 years younger, but 20 years tougher. He'd seen things in Vietnam I couldn't talk about, done things to survive that haunted him still. But he had this gift. He could read people like they were books written in big print. When I showed up at his office that morning, coffee in hand, manila folder Daniel left behind tucked under my arm, Vincent took one look at my face and knew. "Bobby," he said, voice rough from too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. "You look like a man who just found out his house is haunted." I sat in the worn chair across from his desk, the one with duct tape holding the leather together, and I told him everything. The papers, Daniel's shaking hands, Catherine waiting across the street like a getaway driver. Vincent poured us both coffee, the strong kind that could wake the dead and keep them walking, and leaned back in his chair. The springs groaned, the ceiling fan wobbled. Outside, Detroit traffic hummed its usual song of sirens and bass, and life trying to happen against all odds. "Bobby, I'm gonna tell you something, and it's gonna hurt," Vincent said, looking at me with those eyes that had seen too much truth. "When family starts acting like strangers, you better start protecting yourself like they are. Whatever's going on with Daniel and Catherine, it ain't about love. It's about something else. And we need to find out what before it's too late." He agreed to investigate, to dig into my children's finances, their recent activities, anything that might explain this sudden interest in their parents' estate. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. "And Bobby, don't design nothing. Don't trust nothing. Not even from your own blood." Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Every time a car pulled up, I checked if it was Daniel or Catherine. Margaret noticed my tension. "Bobby, what's wrong?" she'd ask, touching my face, with hands that had loved me for 50 years. "You're somewhere else." I'd kiss her forehead and lie. "Just tired, baby. Just old." But truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of what Vincent might find. Terrified of what it would do to Margaret when she learned. She still believed in our children. Still thought they were just busy, just stressed, just living their lives. She didn't see the predators circling. Or maybe she did and couldn't admit it. Sometimes love is the blindfold we tie on ourselves, because seeing the truth would kill us faster than any disease. When Vincent called me back to his office, his face told me everything before his mouth opened. He had papers spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, court filings, credit reports, surveillance photos. "Your boy Daniel," Vincent started, voice heavy. "He's drowning, gambling debts to some very unfriendly people. We're talking $180,000 deep. That house in Bloomfield Hills he always bragged about? Foreclosure proceedings started 3 months ago. That BMW you co-signed for? 2 payments from repossession. Bobby, he's financially dead. And dead men do desperate things." My hands went numb. My son, my firstborn, the boy who'd promised to be better than me, do more than me, make me proud. He'd become a liar, living on borrowed money and stolen time. But Vincent wasn't finished. Catherine's no better. Her real estate business? It's a front. She hasn't sold a house in 2 years. Her husband left her, took half of everything, and she's been living off credit cards she can't pay. Together, Bobby, they've been meeting with a lawyer who specializes in one thing: elder guardianship cases. They're building a case to have you and Margaret declared incompetent. They've already filed preliminary paperwork. claiming you're showing signs of dementia, that Margaret left the stove on multiple times, that you gave away $50,000 to an email scam. All lies. But if a judge believes them, if you don't fight back, they can take control of everything. Your money, your house, your life. The room spun. My chest felt tight. Vincent grabbed my arm. Bobby, breathe. Just breathe. But how do you breathe when you find out your own children are trying to bury you alive while your heart's still beating? I told Margaret everything that night. We sat in our living room, the one where we'd raised these children, celebrated birthdays, opened Christmas presents, built a life from love and sacrifice, and I showed her Vincent's evidence. Bank statements with Daniel's name, court filings with Catherine's signature, surveillance photos of them meeting with lawyers, counting what looked like cash from the Golden Years assisted living representative. Margaret didn't cry at first. She just stared at those papers like they were written in a language she'd never learned. Then her hands started shaking. Then her whole body. "Where did we go wrong, Bobby?" she whispered. And that question broke something in me that hasn't healed yet. Where did we fail them? I pulled her close, felt her heart racing against mine, and I told her the truth I'd been avoiding. We didn't fail them, baby. We gave them everything. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe we gave so much, they forgot what earning meant, what family meant, what love without conditions looked like. We decided to confront them together. I called Daniel and Catherine, told them we needed to have a family meeting about something important. Made it sound like we needed their help with estate planning, like we were finally ready to sign those papers. I could hear the excitement in their voices, the greed, the relief. They agreed to come for Sunday dinner, Margaret's specialty. Part of me hoped the smell of her cooking, collard greens, mac and cheese, cornbread that could make angels weep, would remind them who we were to them, would wake up whatever humanity was left, sleeping inside their hearts. But I also called Vincent and our lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, a 60-year-old sister who'd seen every kind of family betrayal and didn't play games with elder abuse. They agreed to be there, hidden until the right moment. We were setting a trap for our own children, and God help me, it felt necessary. Sunday came with rain, dark clouds covering Detroit like a funeral shroud. Daniel arrived first, checking his phone every 30 seconds, sweating despite the cool weather. Catherine came 10 minutes later with her laptop, already talking about wonderful options for your golden years before she even sat down. Margaret had cooked since dawn, hoping food would soften what was coming. When they saw Vincent and Mrs. Henderson sitting in the living room, their faces went through more changes than traffic lights. Confusion, anger, fear. "What is this?" Catherine demanded, already standing, already calculating escape routes. "Sit down," I said, using the voice I'd used when they were teenagers caught sneaking out. The voice that meant business. We need to have a conversation about family, about money, and about lies. Daniel started to protest, but Vincent's hand on his shoulder was a suggestion that wasn't optional. Mrs. Henderson pulled out her own thick folder and began spreading papers on our coffee table. Bank statements showing Margaret's and my perfect credit. Medical records from our doctors stating we were both of sound mind and body. No dementia, no incompetence. Then the evidence of their scheme, the forged claims they'd filed with the court, the finder's fees from Golden Years Assisted Living, The plan to have us institutionalized so they could liquidate our assets. Your parents have been very smart, Mrs. Henderson said, voice sharp as broken glass. They documented everything, recorded everything. And what we have here is enough to file criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The room got so quiet, you could hear Margaret's roses rustling outside in the rain. Daniel's face went pale. Catherine's went red. Then Jasmine broke first. She didn't cry sorry tears. She cried angry tears. Tears of rage at being caught, at plans falling apart, at having to face consequences for the first time in her privileged life. "You don't understand," she screamed, mascara running like black rivers down her face. "We're drowning. Marcus is going to get his legs broken. I'm going to be homeless. And you're sitting on a gold mine, living in the past, too stubborn to help your own children." That's when Margaret spoke. And her voice had steel I'd never heard before. "We would have helped you. We always have. All you had to do was ask. Be honest. Remember that we're your parents, not your piggy bank." Daniel finally found his voice, ugly and entitled. "Ask, beg, for what's going to be ours anyway. You're 73, Dad. Mom's 71. How much longer do you really think you have? Why should we suffer while you sit on wealth you don't even use?" The room froze, because in that moment, my son had just wished me dead to my face. And meant it. I stood up slow, my knees creaking but my resolve solid as Granddaddy's foundation. "Get out of my house," I said, voice quiet but absolute. "Both of you. And don't come back until you remember what family means." Daniel laughed. Bitter, broken, cruel. "This isn't over, old man. One way or another, we're going to get what we deserve." Catherine gathered her things, laptop clutched like a shield against reality. As she passed her mother, the woman who'd carried her for 9 months, who'd rocked her through colic, who'd sewn pearls onto her wedding dress by hand, she leaned in and whispered something that still echoes in my nightmares. "You should have died years ago. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Margaret's knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the floor, felt her whole body shaking like she'd been shot. After they left, she collapsed in my arms, sobbing like I hadn't heard since we lost our 3rd baby 40 years ago. Vincent and Mrs. Henderson stayed with us until midnight, planning legal strategies, building defenses, feeling restraining orders. But Margaret couldn't stop crying. She kept saying, "My babies! Bobby! What happened to my babies?" I held her in our bed that night, felt her heart racing, felt her breathing too fast, too shallow. "Maybe we should go to the hospital," I suggested, worried about her color, her chest pain. "I'm fine," she insisted, "just heartbroken." Hearts don't break like bones, Bobby. They break slow, from the inside. I stayed awake all night, holding her, listening to her breathing, praying to a God I sometimes doubted. "Lord, if you're listening, don't take her. Take anything else, but not her. I can't do this life without her." But God doesn't always answer prayers the way we want. Sometimes He has other plans. Harder plans. The next morning, Margaret didn't wake at her usual time. 6 a.m. passed, then 7. I'd fallen asleep around 4, exhausted from worry and heartbreak. At 7:30, I reached over to touch her shoulder, tell her I'd make breakfast, tell her we'd survived worse than this. But her shoulder was cold, too cold. I sat up fast, heart hammering. "Margaret? Baby?" Nothing. I touched her face. Cold, her hand, cold. I shook her gently, then harder. Then I was screaming her name. The paramedics came within 10 minutes, but they couldn't bring her back. She died around 3 in the morning, they said. Massive heart attack. Quick, painless, they promised. Though how would they know? How would anyone know what pain she felt in those final moments, knowing her children had turned into monsters? The funeral was 3 days later. I moved through it like a ghost. Pastor Williams spoke about Margaret's kindness, her service to the community, her unwavering faith. But all I could think was, my children killed their mother, not with a gun or knife, but with cruelty, with greed, with betrayal so complete it stopped her heart. Daniel and Catherine showed up in black, crying their public tears for the neighbors to see. People who didn't know the truth patted their shoulders, told them how sorry they were for their loss. But I saw them. I saw Catherine checking her phone during the eulogy. I saw Daniel calculating something on his fingers during the hymns. They weren't mourning, they were waiting for the estate to settle, waiting for their payday. At the burial, when they tried to hug me, I stepped back. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't touch me. You've done enough." That night I went home to the empty house. Margaret's roses were blooming despite her absence, red and white against the dark earth. I sat in her chair by the window, the one where she'd watch those roses every morning with her coffee, and I talked to her like she was still there. "Baby, I don't know how to do this without you. 50 years, you handled the hard stuff. I handled the hard stuff. But this is both, and I'm lost." The house creaked its old bones around me. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Life continued like Margaret's death didn't matter, like the world hadn't just lost its brightest light. I made a promise to her that night, sitting in her empty chair, smelling her perfume still lingering in the fabric. "I won't let them win, baby. I won't let them take everything we built. And I'll find out the truth about what really killed you. I promise." I didn't know then how dark that truth would be. I didn't know that the worst revelation was still coming. The day after Margaret's funeral, I woke to sounds downstairs. Heavy footsteps, drawers opening. I grabbed Margaret's pistol from the nightstand, the little .38 she'd insisted we buy after break-ins started happening in the neighborhood, and crept to the stairs. My heart was hammering. My hands were shaking. I peeked around the corner and saw them, Daniel in my bedroom going through Margaret's jewelry box, pocketing her grandmother's pearls. Catherine in the basement with her phone, taking pictures of everything, making notes like she was doing an inventory. They had keys. Of course they did. We'd given them keys when they were teenagers, never imagining we'd need to change the locks against our own blood. "The funeral's barely over," I said from the doorway, gun at my side, but visible. "And you're already looting?" Daniel didn't look ashamed, just caught. "We're doing inventory, Dad. Someone has to. You're clearly not capable of managing all this alone." I called a locksmith that afternoon. Young brother named Terrell, couldn't have been more than 25, came out within an hour. As he worked, changing every lock on every door, he must have seen something in my face. "Family trouble, Mr. Thompson?" he asked quietly. I just nodded. He gave me his card. My grandpa went through something similar. People he trusted tried to put him in a home, take his house. "If you need anything, anytime, you call me." That kindness from a stranger hit harder than my children's cruelty. made me realize the world still had good people in it, even if they weren't in my bloodline. Terrell also suggested security cameras. These new ones, they're cheap, easy to install, send alerts to your phone. Someone comes near your house, you'll know. I bought 6 cameras that day. Front door, back door, garage, driveway, living room, kitchen. Let them try something now. That night, sitting alone in a house that felt too big without Margaret, I got a call from Vincent. "Bobby, I need to tell you something. Something I found that I don't want to tell you." My stomach dropped. "Just say it, Vincent. I can't take any more surprises." He took a deep breath I could hear through the phone. "I tracked Daniel's recent activity. He's been to your house 6 times in the last month, always when you and Margaret were at church or shopping. I got video from your neighbor's security camera. He was copying keys, Bobby, making spares. He's been planning this for a while." The walls felt like they were closing in. My son had been sneaking into our house like a thief, plotting and planning, while Margaret and I prayed at church. "There's more," Vincent continued. "I found out about the assisted living company. Golden Years. They pay a finder's fee for every senior successfully transitioned into their facility. $10,000 per person. Your kids were going to get 20 grand once they got you and Margaret admitted." I hung up and vomited in the kitchen sink. My children had literally tried to sell their parents for $20,000. The amount didn't even matter. They'd have done it for less. I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked older, harder, broken. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, watching the security camera feeds on my phone, waiting for them to come back. And they did. Around 2 in the morning, Catherine's Mercedes pulled up slow, lights off. She sat there for 10 minutes, watching the house. Then she made a call. Then she drove away. But the message was clear. They were watching me, waiting for me to slip, waiting for a moment of weakness they could exploit. The next week was psychological warfare. Catherine would show up at odd hours with friends who looked more like muscle than companions. She'd let herself in with keys that no longer worked, then act shocked and hurt that I'd changed the locks. "Daddy, I'm just worried about you," she'd say, while her phone recorded, trying to catch me confused or disoriented. Daniel sent certified letters about my deteriorating mental state, copied to doctors I'd never seen, lawyers I'd never hired. They were building a narrative. Old man loses wife. Can't cope. Needs help. One morning I woke up at 5 a.m. to find Catherine in my kitchen, making coffee like she still lived there. "Just checking on you, Daddy," she said sweetly. But I saw her phone propped up, camera pointed at me. "I'm calling the police," I said clearly, loudly, performing for her camera. "You're trespassing," she smiled. "Go ahead. Tell them your daughter wanted to make sure her father was okay after losing his wife. See how that sounds?" That night, Vincent came over and swept the house for bugs. He found 5 more cameras they had hidden, in smoke detectors, in the vents, even inside Margaret's favorite lamp. They'd been watching everything, recording me talking to Margaret's empty chair, recording me crying over old photos, recording me pacing at night, building evidence that I was crazy, incapable, dangerous to myself. "We're leaving these where they are," Vincent said, already forming a plan. Let them watch. But now you're going to give them a show. You're going to act sharper than you ever have. You're going to document your daily routine, your competence, your clarity. We're going to use their surveillance against them. So that's what I did. For the next week, I performed for those hidden eyes. I cooked. I cleaned. I handled business calls with precision. At night, I'd sit in Margaret's chair and read her Bible verses out loud, strong and clear, showing whoever was watching that grief isn't insanity. That missing your wife doesn't mean you're incompetent. That love and loss are human, not symptoms of dementia. Thanksgiving came dark and cold. I'd planned to spend it alone, maybe volunteer at the church dinner. But around noon, I heard cars pulling up. Multiple cars. Daniel, Catherine, and 5 people I'd never seen before. Hard-looking folks who didn't smile, didn't introduce themselves, just walked into my house like they owned it. Family intervention, Catherine announced cheerfully, setting up a camera on a tripod. We're here to help you, Daddy, to show everyone how much you need us. What followed was 3 hours of coordinated psychological torture. They'd prepared scripts. The strangers claimed to be healthcare workers who'd observed me, though I'd never seen them in my life. One by one, they described my symptoms, talking to myself, neglecting self-care, wandering confused, showing signs of paranoid delusions, all lies, all theater. When I tried to leave, one of the men blocked the door. 6 foot something, built like he'd done time, eyes dead as winter. This is for your own good, Mr. Thompson. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were trying to break me, really break me, push me until I either signed their papers or did something they could use to have me committed. So I sat back down, closed my eyes, and started reciting the Lord's Prayer, then hymns, then every Bible verse Margaret had loved. I didn't stop, didn't acknowledge them, didn't give them anything except Word of God, for 3 solid hours. Margaret had taught me that prayer was armor, that faith was a shield, that when the world came at you with lies, you answered with truth. Finally, one of the strangers said, "This ain't working. Old man's tougher than you said." They packed up and left. But Catherine's parting words froze my blood. "Everybody breaks, Daddy. Even you. Especially you." I called Vincent immediately. I need to disappear for a while. Within 2 days, he'd rented a furnished apartment across town under his company's name. I moved quietly, taking only essentials. Left the house, maintained, but empty. Cameras still rolling. Mail still delivered. Let them watch an empty house. Let them wonder where I'd gone. I needed space to think, to plan, to figure out my next move, without feeling like prey in my own home. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, barely furnished, but it was mine. Safe, anonymous. I could breathe there, could sleep without jumping at every sound. Vincent set up security there too, but I felt exposed, like a turtle without its shell. That house on Boston Boulevard wasn't just property. It was my history, my grandfather's sweat, my daddy's dreams, Margaret's love made solid in brick and wood. But it only took them a week to find me. I woke up December 3rd to find Daniel sitting in my living room, having picked the lock like the criminal he'd become. "Running away, Dad. That's not very responsible behavior for someone claiming to be of sound mind." He had papers with him, new ones, commitment papers signed by a doctor I'd never met, stating I was a danger to myself and needed immediate psychiatric intervention. All fake, Daniel said casually, like we were discussing the weather. But by the time anyone figures that out, you'll have been in the system for 72 hours. And a lot can happen in 72 hours. Medications get mixed up. Old men fall. Hearts stop. He was actually threatening to have me killed. My son? The boy I'd taught to play catch? The man I'd put through law school? He was calmly discussing my murder like it was a business transaction. Sign the house over, he said, sliding new papers across the table. Or I make the call. Catherine's already at the house, ready to play the traumatized daughter who found her father's suicide note. He showed me the note. Handwriting so close to mine, it made my blood freeze. They'd been practicing, planning. This was attempted murder, with a paper trail designed to make them look like grieving children, not predators. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. Not from fear, from rage so deep I didn't have words for it. But I signed. Because what Vincent and I hadn't told them was that the apartment was wired for sound and video. Vincent was outside right now, recording everything. We had Daniel on tape, threatening me, admitting to forgery, conspiracy, attempted murder. But I needed more. I needed Catherine, too. After Daniel left, smug and satisfied, I called Catherine. Put tremble in my voice, played broken. Told her I'd signed everything over to Daniel, but I was scared of him, that maybe she could protect me, that maybe we could work something out. Her greed overrode her suspicion. She arrived within the hour, and when she learned Daniel had everything, her rage was volcanic. That bastard! We agreed to split it. I'm the one who found the doctor, who wrote the suicide note, who planted the cameras. She was confessing to everything, right there on camera, too angry to realize the trap she'd walked into. Vincent signaled me from outside. We had enough. But then Catherine said something that made my world stop spinning. At least I took care of the insurance problem. I asked what she meant, trying to keep my voice steady. Her smile was pure evil. Mama's medication, the heart pills. I switched them out weeks before she died. Placebos. Every time she thought she was taking her medicine, she was just swallowing sugar pills. My vision went white. My ears rang. Her heart attack wasn't from stress, Daddy. It was from not having the medication she needed to live. She was worth more to us dead than alive. That insurance money was ours. She'd murdered her mother. Not metaphorically, actually murdered her. I must have made a sound, some kind of animal noise that humans aren't supposed to make, because Catherine laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, are you having a heart attack too? How poetic. Like mother. Like father. But I wasn't dying. Not yet. I was rage finding its footing. I stood up, steady as Granddaddy's foundation, and looked at this thing that used to be my daughter. This creature that had grown in Margaret's womb, nursed at her breast, been loved with every fiber of her being. Your mother's last words, I said, voice quiet and deadly, were about not letting hatred be our legacy. But you've left me no choice. I hit the panic button Vincent had given me. Within minutes, Detroit police sirens filled the air. Catherine's face went from smug to terrified in seconds. She tried to run, but Vincent and two off-duty cops he'd hired were already at the door. The look on her face when Vincent played back her confession. That was the first honest emotion I'd seen from her in years. Pure, naked fear. I didn't mean it, she stammered as the handcuffs clicked. I was angry. I was just talking. I didn't actually... But the detective cut her off. "We'll be exhuming Mrs. Thompson's body," he said. "We'll be testing her medications. And if what you said is true, ma'am, you're looking at first-degree murder." They took her out screaming, cursing me, cursing Vincent, cursing the world for not giving her what she deserved. 2 hours later, they picked up Daniel at a casino in Windsor. He'd already spent half the money he thought he'd gotten from the forged house sale. Bail bondsmen don't take kindly to being played. Neither do gambling debts. Neither do fathers who loved you once. The investigation moved fast. They found everything. Text messages between Daniel and Catherine, planning the scheme. Bank records showing Catherine had bought bottles of fake pills from some online pharmacy. Security footage from her drugstore showing her copying Margaret's prescription bottles. The doctor who'd signed the fake commitment papers turned out to be a disbarred physician Daniel had found on the internet. The health care workers from the intervention were actors hired from Craigslist. The lawyer they'd consulted about guardianship turned state's witness, providing emails and recorded conversations. The case against them was airtight. But more than that, it was monstrous. The prosecutor, a woman named Sandra Hayes, who'd seen every kind of family crime, told me she'd never seen anything this calculated. "Mr. Thompson, your children didn't just try to steal from you. They systematically planned your destruction and murdered your wife. This isn't greed. This is evil." They exhumed Margaret's body on a cold January morning. I wasn't there. Couldn't be. The thought of my wife being disturbed, her rest interrupted, because of what our children had done, it was too much. Vincent went for me, stood as witness, made sure they treated her with dignity. The toxicology report came back 3 weeks later. No heart medication in her system. Just placebos, sugar pills. Margaret had been walking around for weeks with an untreated heart condition, her body working overtime, without the medicine keeping it stable, until that night when the stress and heartbreak and betrayal became too much. Catherine had murdered her as surely as if she'd put a gun to her head. Maybe more cruelly, because Margaret died thinking her children just didn't love her anymore. She never knew they'd killed her on purpose. The nights after learning the truth, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Margaret's last weeks. How she'd sometimes clutch her chest. How she'd seemed more tired than usual. How I'd asked if she was taking her medicine, and she'd said yes, showing me the bottle, never knowing those pills were lies. "I should have checked," I said to Vincent one night, when he found me sitting in the dark, tears streaming. "Should have looked closer. Should have protected her." Vincent grabbed my shoulders hard. "Bobby, stop. You couldn't have known. Nobody could have known their own child would do something like this. This isn't on you. This is on them, on their choices, on their evil." But guilt doesn't care about logic. Guilt just sits there in your chest like a stone, reminding you that the woman you loved for 50 years died slowly, painfully, unnecessarily, while you slept beside her clueless. The trial started in March, almost exactly a year after our anniversary party. The courtroom was packed, news cameras everywhere. The media had picked up the story. Detroit children, murder mother, plot father's death for inheritance. Headlines wrote themselves. I sat in the gallery every day, not as a witness. The recordings spoke for themselves, but as a father, watching his children face consequences for the first time in their entitled lives. The prosecution didn't need me. They had Catherine's confession on video, Daniel's threats on audio, text messages, bank records, the fake pills, the forged documents, the testimony from the doctor, the actors, the lawyer. It was an avalanche of evidence, each piece more damning than the last. The defense tried to paint them as desperate children driven to extremes by their father's stubbornness, but the jury wasn't buying it. These weren't children. They were calculating adults who'd murdered one parent and planned to destroy another for money. When they played Catherine's confession about the pills, the courtroom gasped. You could hear people crying. The jury looked sick. Even the judge looked disturbed. And she'd been doing this for 30 years. I watched Catherine's face as she heard her own voice. I switched them out weeks before she died. Placebos. Every time she thought she was taking her medicine, she was just swallowing sugar pills. She tried to look remorseful, tried to cry, but it was too late. The jury had seen the real her, the one who'd laughed about her mother's death, who'd called it taking care of the insurance problem. When they played Daniel's threats about having me institutionalized or killed, his lawyer objected so many times the judge threatened to hold him in contempt. But the damage was done. The jury heard everything. The verdict came back in under 2 hours. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and for Catherine, first-degree murder. The judge called it one of the most callous and calculated crimes she'd seen in her career. Daniel got 25 years to life. Catherine got life without parole. As they led them away in chains, both looked at me. Daniel's eyes were already dead, like prison had claimed his soul before his body even arrived. But Catherine's eyes still burned with hatred. She mouthed words I'll carry forever. This isn't over. Maybe not for her. Maybe in her twisted mind, I was still the villain, still the obstacle, still the man who denied her what she thought she deserved. But for me, it was over. The war I never wanted to fight was finished. I'd won. But winning felt like losing everything that mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Mr. Thompson, how do you feel about the verdict? Will you ever forgive your children? What do you want people to know? I stopped, looked directly at the cameras, and said the only thing that mattered. I want people to know that money isn't worth this. No amount of inheritance is worth destroying your family. If you're watching this and you're planning something like what my children did, stop. Turn back. Because there's no coming back from this kind of evil. You can't unpoison your mother's pills. You can't unkill your parents' dreams. You can't unlive in a prison cell. Whatever you think you're owed, it's not worth what you'll lose. Your humanity, your soul, your chance at redemption. Then I walked away, leaving the cameras and questions behind. Vincent drove me to Margaret's grave. I sat there as the sun set over Detroit, telling her everything. Baby, they got what they deserved. Justice was served. But it doesn't bring you back. Doesn't fill the hole in our bed. Doesn't make Sunday dinners feel like home. I failed them, Margaret. Failed as a father. The wind through the cemetery trees sounded like her voice. You loved them, Bobby. That's all any parent can do. The rest was their choice. But I couldn't accept that. Not yet. Because parents are supposed to protect their children. even from themselves. And I'd miss the moment when my babies turned into monsters, miss the warning signs, miss the chance to save them before they became unsavable. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you," I whispered, touching her headstone. "So sorry I let them kill you. So sorry I'm still here and you're not." I stayed until the cemetery closed, until the caretaker gently told me it was time to go. But how do you leave your heart buried in the ground? I sold the house that spring. The decision wasn't easy. That house was 3 generations of sweat and dreams and love. But it was also haunted now, haunted by Margaret's absence, haunted by the memory of Daniel going through her jewelry, haunted by knowing Catherine had stood in that kitchen switching out pills that would kill her mother. A young family bought it, husband, wife, 3 kids, a dog named Max. They had that light in their eyes, that hope that said they were building something. The morning I handed over the keys, I walked through one last time. In the basement, behind the water heater, I found something that stopped my heart. A time capsule Daniel and Catherine had made as kids, maybe 10 and 8 years old. Inside were drawings of our family, letters to their future selves, photos from Christmas morning. Daniel had written, "When I grow up, I want to be like my dad, strong and kind and smart." And Catherine had drawn a picture of herself as a doctor, helping people like Mommy does with her smile. I sat on that cold basement floor, holding proof that my children had once been good, had once been capable of love and dreams and innocence. And I wept for the last time, not for what they'd become, but for who they'd been, and for the moment when everything went wrong that I'd never be able to identify. Was it when I gave them too much? When I protected them from consequences? When I taught them they were special instead of teaching them to be good? Or was it something deeper, something broken inside them that no parenting could have fixed? I'll never know. And that not knowing is its own kind of hell. I left that time capsule in the house for the new family to find someday. Maybe they'd look at those children's drawings and remember that houses hold more than furniture. They hold the ghosts of who we used to be. I live simply now in a small apartment near the church. 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for when my grandchildren visit. I donated most of my assets to charity like I'd planned. The church, youth programs, organizations fighting elder abuse. I kept enough to live modestly and set up a trust fund for little Robert Jr. and Gabrielle. Not a fortune, just enough to give them choices their parents never appreciated. I volunteer at the community center they built where our house stood, teaching woodworking to kids who remind me of Daniel and Catherine before the poison set in. I show them how to measure twice and cut once, how to sand rough edges smooth, how to build something that lasts. Sometimes I wonder if I'm trying to save them, or if I'm trying to save the memory of my own children by helping someone else's. Karen brings the grandkids to visit twice a month. We don't talk about their father or aunt. We just build new memories, carefully, hopefully, like setting foundations for a house that won't collapse. Little Robert has his father's hands, but hopefully not his heart. Gabriel has Catherine's smile, but hopefully not her soul. I teach them about earning, about gratitude, about the difference between wanting and needing. I tell them stories about their grandmother. The good ones, the ones where she was alive and laughing and teaching us all how to love. Tell us about the roses. Pop, pop. Gabrielle always asks. So I tell them how Margaret planted red ones for love and white ones for new beginnings. How she tended them every morning with her coffee. How they still bloom somewhere, keeping her memory alive. Some nights, I still wake up at 3 a.m., the time Margaret died, the time her heart gave up under the weight of betrayal and bad pills. I swear I can feel her next to me. You did your best, Bobby, she whispers in the darkness. Let it go now. Live what's left with grace. So I try. I tend roses in the community garden. I teach Sunday school. I visit inmates at the county jail. Not Daniel or Catherine. They've made it clear they don't want to see me. But other people's lost children trying to find their way back to human. One young man, serving time for robbery, asked me how I forgive the unforgivable. I told him the truth. You don't. You just choose to stop carrying the knife they stuck in you. You pull it out. You let it heal, and you move forward with the scar. He asked if the scar ever stops hurting. No, I said, but eventually it hurts less than the memory of who they used to be. This is my story. This is my warning. This is my testimony. If you're watching this and you have parents who love you, call them right now, not tomorrow. Right now. Tell them you love them while they can still hear it. If you have children who still look at you with clean eyes, protect that innocence with your life. Don't let the world poison it. Don't let greed replace love. And if you think family can't betray you, that blood is thicker than greed. Remember Robert Thompson from Detroit. Remember Margaret, who died from pills that weren't pills. Remember that sometimes the monsters aren't under the bed. Sometimes they're sitting at your dinner table, calling you dad, planning your destruction, while eating food you cooked with love. But also remember this. Even after all of it, I'm still here, still standing, still choosing to believe that somewhere in the ruins of my children are the babies I once held, and that maybe, just maybe, redemption finds us all in the end. Even if we don't deserve it. Especially if we don't deserve it. That's what Margaret would have wanted. That's what I choose to want too. Peace doesn't come cheap. Sometimes it costs you everything. But the alternative, living in the war, costs you more. It costs you your soul. So I choose peace for Margaret, for those grandbabies, for myself. Because after 73 years on this earth, I've learned one thing. Love is stronger than hate, but only if you choose it. Every single day, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Drop a comment if this story touched you. Tell me where you're watching from. And please, whatever you do, don't let greed poison your family. The money isn't worth it. The house isn't worth it. Nothing is worth what I lost. Nothing ever could be.